Hey, you're watching Home. My name is Irina Pravet, and today I'm really excited to talk about the book Braving the Wilderness by Brene Brown, The Quest for True Belonging and the Courage to Stand Alone. So I'm specifically interested about how this applies to us living abroad and how we find that courage and true belonging abroad. So if you're interested in a discussion about a book that deals with loneliness, connection, vulnerability, and the courage to be different, then I hope you'll join me. So the way I've thought to do this is that I'll give you a little bit of like a play-by-play, but I've sort of taken Brene's whole book, reorganized, like I just took the bits that really stood out to me to kind of give you this overarching idea of the beautiful themes covered in this book. I'm not going to like ruin the whole thing. I'm not going to talk about every single little piece of it, but I just want to kind of talk about the stuff that I'm really, really excited about. So she starts the book off with this quote of Maya Angelou's that she's like wrestled with her whole life until starting to write this book. And the quote is, "You are only free when you realize you belong no place, you belong every place, no place at all. The price is high, the reward is great." So when I read this, it just made me think of a couple years ago. I met a girl in Tampere when I was living there, and she told me, her whole family's from there. She's always grown up there, like she knows she's from there, and then she was asking me, like, where are you from? And I had this like totally, half-baked answer of, yeah, I was like born in Romania and grew up in Canada, and then the French part and then the English part too, and then I like moved here and I'm like from everywhere and nowhere. And it was so funny to see. I think this is the first time I really saw it when she was like, that is so cool. Like I wish I had that. Like it's so boring. I'm only from here, blah, blah, blah. So I've often felt this tension between like, the grass is always greener on the other side. So there's the place that you're from, that you either know for sure, or then you feel like you're not really from anywhere. And I feel like maybe this is what Maya Angelou's talking about, that there's somewhere in between um, that that place, that every place and that no place. And I think this is really a great way to start talking about what is the wilderness. So the subtitle for this book is The Quest for True Belonging and the Courage to Stand Alone. So in a sense, what we're kind of getting at here is that there's no good or bad. There's no like I belong here or I don't belong anywhere. It's sort of like finding that that attitude of belonging within yourself. What I think is so interesting about this concept of the wilderness is that it can't be avoided. Like if you move abroad, you have basically chosen to look out at the wilderness. It's this huge expanse of unknown, and it's like staring you in the face, and it's terrifying. There is no way that you can be exactly the same, do all the same things you did, remain comfortable with everything that's familiar, because you've transplanted yourself out of the familiar. You have different people, you have a different language, you have a different culture, which means that people have different assumptions and different understandings of things that you thought you understood, and suddenly people understand them in a completely different way. So this like when we move abroad, right, this whole idea, when we confront the unknown, it's terrifying. It's just like you cannot be the same person that you were at home, as you were at home abroad, because it's just not possible. You're in this unknown wilderness territory, right? So a bunch of stuff happens here, and these are some of the themes discussed in this book, which I thought were so relevant to us. The first is loneliness, and she talks about loneliness Brene talks about loneliness in a very interesting way. She says that basically we tend to have a lot of shame around loneliness, like we're not supposed to feel lonely, and there's a lot of associations with like criminals and loners and like people that are alone being weird. So we don't want to like admit to loneliness. And I can say from my own experience that this is something like I continue to try to like figure out, that I'm working on at the moment. And so it felt really relevant to me. And the way that she painted this picture, she said, you know, loneliness is a biological response. So if you're hungry, your brain communicates to you through hunger that you need food. If you're thirsty, you're being communicated to this biological response that you need water. If you're in pain, you're being told that there's danger of like, you know, your tissue and like you being harmed. And if there's loneliness, so your ability to thrive, it is affected, right? It means that you're seeking or you need social connection, right? Because because we are social beings, connective beings. And I find that that was such a kind of eye opener. And she goes on to give like more stats about loneliness and how like you're like the risk of dying is much higher. Like it's been actually studied to the point where it was like, if you live with air pollution, your increased risk of dying is like 5%. And then she goes like gradually to explain like all of those. And then it ends with like, if you live with loneliness, then your chance of dying is like 45%. And it's like, wow. So this has been studied, you know? And I see this, I saw it in my own experience. So no one wants to be lonely. You want to like clump together with other people. And so one phenomenon that I noticed abroad is that there are like expat circles and expat meetups. And whenever I would go to these, I just never felt like I fit in because I just, maybe this is just my perception, but I felt like a lot of it was a lot of complaining and people like coming together as a kind of like fear, you know, that we don't belong with the locals, so we can belong with each other, and it just becomes this kind of us against them thing. Maybe that's just my perception. Maybe I just went to like a couple, like, I don't know, caught people on a bad day. But it just, I also didn't feel this drive to like connect with other people who were different. I just kind of wanted to like feel more normal, sort of. So anyway, you know, we all deal with this in our own ways. Another thing that I think people find when they're, you know, confronted with this wilderness abroad, and she also talks about this in her book, and she mostly talks about like the political landscape right now in the States, because this book came out in 2017, near the end of the year. But I find that it's so applicable. So the second thing is like armoring up, right? So we see like, okay, I'm lonely. I feel shameful about that, or I feel different, or maybe there's something wrong with me. So people just armor up, you internalize it, and you try to protect yourself from that feeling of, you know, like like being different, or whatever danger is involved in that. So it does turn into this kind of like us versus them, me against the world. And there's also a mention of like sorting. So like for political context, for example, you have people who, you know, there's like left wing, right wing, right? It's pretty straightforward. And as people find it scary to stay in that middle ground, and they'll be like, oh, well, I'm here and I belong here. There's actually, so this is called sorting. You just pick your group. Basically, it takes courage to stay in that middle ground, but at the same time, those people that are choosing their groups are also feeling more and more lonely, more and more isolated. So it's not even like you're getting the benefits of having sorted yourself. You're actually just putting up more walls, more armor around yourself. And the third thing that can happen when you're confronted with this kind of terrifying new wilderness, is that you try to brave it, right? And you try to figure out how are you going to be yourself and contribute what it is that you feel you can give, in this new or like not so new place. And this is basically what this book is all about. So she's, if you don't know Brene, she's a researcher, who also writes books that people actually want to read, and like researcher slash storyteller. And so she talks about like having studied people who exemplified this trait of true belonging, and who had accomplished this in their lives or were striving for it in their lives, and how they got there. So this book is all about like what she's found, basically. And so I'll read you the definition of true belonging, because I know this is going to resonate with you, because it spoke to me as somebody who lives abroad. So true belonging is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world, and find sacredness in both being part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. So I read that and I was like, yeah, I'll have some of that, thanks. It just, I think that definition just like speaks for itself. So it really, when I spoke about those tensions between like belonging somewhere and not belonging anywhere, and kind of having this duality between it, you know, it's also this like being yourself, being a part of something, but also being okay standing alone. So, yeah. Anyway, just great quote. Um, and I feel that in order to do that, we have to open ourselves up, right? So, like, if we are being our most authentic self and we belong to ourselves so deeply, like, you're not going to be armored up. You're not going to be like lonely and misunderstood, even though those things might be part of your journey because we're all human and we all have to get to that place somewhere. So, it really involves like taking some of those layers of pain away and opening yourself up to being vulnerable. So, funny enough, the definition that she gives for vulnerability, and I thought this was excellent, was the ability to navigate uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. I mean, if moving abroad requires some sort of skill, wouldn't it be the ability to navigate uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure? I mean, you're basically facing the unknown, right? So what could be more useful? And this is not like wishy-washy, like, oh, let me just talk about my feelings. She really goes into a lot of depth talking about joy and pain as these emotions that require vulnerability. And so we can think like, okay, pain, yeah, like allowing myself to be seen in pain when I don't know that someone's going to hold the space for that, or they might just feel really uncomfortable. Again, when you belong yourself into yourself so fully, it's okay. Like you don't need people to act a certain way. You just kind of have to trust, and that's the scary part. But she also talks about joy and how we actually don't like it requires vulnerability. And this made me think like in my own life when I've been trying to open up to joy more and noticed where I was like closing myself off from it. Um, I definitely recognize what you talked about with like foreboding joy. So when something good happens, you immediately think like, oh, no, something bad's gonna happen. Like you leave on vacation and then you think hurricane or something. So, and I've really kind of subtracted some of those layers in my mind to try to figure out like why is it that we do that? Why is it that I immediately imagine like the worst possible thing that could happen? Um, even when I've read like a lot to prove that that's not like the best way to operate. And I found that it was almost like I looked at people who just expressed joy fully, openly, as like a little bit simple or a little bit like dumb and just like, oh, they're not protecting themselves against all the things that can happen. But then I realized if I'm living my life trying to protect myself from all the bad things that can happen, then I'm like missing out on all the joy I could be experiencing. And ultimately, do I want to be like living like a compromise where I'm like holding myself back from joy for fear of like being hurt? Or do I want to live a life where I'm feeling joy fully? And then again, vulnerability, the ability to navigate uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Like this is a quality that helps us like enjoy life to the fullest and really be able to like take advantage of the opportunities that come our way and kind of yeah, like my motto is create a life you love abroad, right? And love is not like a light word. It's like you really have to live it. You have to experience it and not just kind of like shy away from pain, right? So what I think is really interesting in this discussion also is like so when you open yourself up to vulnerability, when you open yourself up to experiencing joy and pain fully, you also have to like be brave enough to be seen, right? So even if someone thinks, oh, that happy person, they're probably not like planning for the horrible things that can happen or whatever. Um, Courage, like it just, all of that requires us to be different, right? Because not everybody acts like this. So you have to feel what's in your heart to sound like super cheesy, and just express it. And like in this sense, when we move abroad, I believe that we're bringing something really, really valuable with us, and that is our perspective, our point of view, our way of seeing things. And I think expressing that difference, that different perspective, when there's a lot of pressure to conform or to not express it because nobody else sees it, right? it requires courage. And at the same time, so this wasn't exactly in the book, but it's something that I want to add onto it. Like, I think that diversity in any place, it just serves this like universal function of, making sure that things on this planet are like in balance, right? You look at like different species and different ecosystems, like the more diverse they are, the more strong they are. Same with like forests and, rivers and all sorts of things. So it makes sense that it would apply within our bodies, within our interactions with others. Like, we're programmed to be different from each other, and that is a strength. But what's interesting when we have like different, this us against them mentality, or when we are just so different in the place that we've moved, like we literally don't look like the other people and we don't speak the language in the same way or at all. Being different takes courage. Like, and it's this kind of it's kind of this tension that keeps you constantly, like, it's asking you to choose all the time. Like, are you going to go with the discomfort of growth, which is really scary, or are you going to stay with the like agonizing discomfort of what's familiar and it's not like working for you? So I do believe in that, in a sense we've been kind of like programmed to feel that way, to be different and to express that difference, to find ways of expressing it, in the context of this book, is like respectfully, when it's like political differences, but also when it's just like a foreign person in a foreign place, to just like truly kind of own that different perspective and to not be so afraid to communicate it. So I want to share with you this passage about the wilderness and what it is. So there was a woman that Brene asked to contribute to here. And her name is Jen Hatmaker. And she's basically, it says here, she's a writer, pastor, philanthropist, and community leader who basically spoke out in a like pretty conservative Christian community about her support of like LGBTQ rights and inclusion. And like she had to brave the wilderness because she basically stepped out from her comfort zone of like, this is the status quo, to like, actually, I believe this. And so this is what she said about the wilderness. I won't sugarcoat this. Standing on the precipice of the wilderness is bone-chilling. Because belonging is so primal, so necessary, the threat of losing your tribe or going alone feels so terrifying as to keep most of us distanced from the wilderness our whole lives. Human approval is one of our most treasured idols, and the offering we must lay at its feet is keeping others comfortable. I'm convinced that discomfort is the great deterrent of our generation. Protecting the status quo against our internal convictions is obviously a luxury of the privileged, because the underdogs and outliers and marginalized have no choice but to experience the daily wilderness. That's us, by the way. But choosing the wily outpost over the security of the city gates takes a true act of courage. That first step will take your breath away. Speaking against power structures that keep some inside and others has a cost, and the currency most often drafted from my account is belonging. Consequently, the wilderness sometimes feels very lonely and punishing, which is a powerful disincentive. But I've discovered something beautiful. The loneliest steps are the ones between the city walls and the heart of the wilderness, where safety is in the rearview mirror. New territory remains to be seen, and the path out to the unknown seems empty. But put one foot in front of the other enough times, stay the course long enough to actually tunnel into the wilderness, and you'll be shocked how many people already live out there. Thriving, dancing, creating, celebrating, belonging, it is not a barren wasteland. It is not unprotected territory. It is not void of human flourishing. The wilderness is where all the creatives and prophets and system buckers and risk takers have always lived, and it is stunningly vibrant. The walk out there is hard, but the authenticity out there is life. I suspect the wilderness is a permanent home for me, which is both happy and hard. So yeah, I suspect the wilderness is a permanent home for me too, and it's been this constant source of tension in my life of, my greatest joy and my greatest fear. And so those words really, really spoke to me. What else did I want to tell you? In addition to vulnerability, one thing that I really love that Brene talked about is the power of collective assembly. And this is basically when people like gather together for any type of interaction. So she gives examples of like when you go see music, or it's some sort of spiritual gathering or a celebration, or like, you know, like the crowds gather on like New Year's in a square, or maybe there's like some kind of party. It could even be a funeral or a protest movement. And basically what they found is that when people come together like that, you kind of stop to, you get out of your own head and you sort of join in this crowd and you see that you are all connected. And then basically that sense of connection, not only does it have like biological benefits, it has a lingering effect. So it's not just like you went to that concert and then you went home and then nothing happened. It's like you went to that concert and then for a week or two or three or whatever, like you think back to it and you think of like having been part of something bigger. And I know for me, this was like, okay, got to get more of that in my life, because I have experienced a couple of those moments in the last year. And as people said in the book, like they're magic. It's just you're with people in this, just this ugh, like when you go to a really good concert and you just like felt so connected to the audience. Or like in October, I was at Emerging Women, and one of the speakers, Tererai Trent, she gave such a powerful talk that like after, like the woman beside me and I like hugged, because it was just like such an amazing moment to like have heard that talk together, and we like didn't know each other at all. So like all sorts of these, you know, we just like open our hearts in a completely different way, when we're in this collective assembly, as they call it. So so yeah, I can definitely see how spending time with people, whether it's like that or whether it's like through face-to-face interaction, it does things to our biology, which is really important. So it's tempting to just like, you know, text and everything, but ultimately, like for us to really thrive as individuals, we do need that sense of connection where you see somebody face to face and feel that you're not alone. And I'm talking like this is like a summary for myself for later as well. But basically, like she said, it doesn't even have to be something big. It could be like shaking someone's hand or high-fiving them or saying hi or making eye contact or whatever. That's basically like just we see things more clearly when we're in a crowd and we get out of our heads and kind of out of the struggle of the inner critic. This is me talking now. This wasn't in the book, but and then I want to give you one more quote to end on. So it's her definition of spirituality, which was also in the definition of true belonging. And she says, spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. And you know, she said like when she read that definition over and over again, she figured like we had broken this link, that we're all connected and we've broken it, and we just, it's so easy to forget when you're like in your own little house, in your own room, in your own world, basically, and then forgetting that there are other people experiencing the same things as you. And so kind of this whole book was about finding your way back to true belonging, and you know, that courage to stand alone, that there's kind of sacredness in both. So I really enjoyed the book. It spoke a lot to me just in terms of how I want to live my life, how I want to create a life that I love abroad. And I thought that it would also, you know, spark some conversation or maybe speak to some of the themes that you've noticed in your own life. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know if you like it. I read a ton of books, and I just thought this would be a fun format to kind of summarize and mix in my own ideas, and also kind of give you a little taste of what's in here. So I haven't even covered like the biggest, you know, kind of tools that she talks about in there. I just kind of like picked out some of the fun ones that stood out for me, but there's lots more to discover in here if it sounded like something that you'd like. So hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.